Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and dear audience. I welcome you on behalf of Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada to the 25th episode of our webinar. Our today's focus is on the changing situation in Myanmar with regards to Rohingya crisis resolution. As a practice, before we begin the session, we want to do treaty acknowledgement. The Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada is located on original lands of Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of Métis nations. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Ladies and gentlemen, today is an important day for us as a policy research think tank because we are going to talk about most important changes that is happening with regards to Rohingya crisis. I was going through, while preparing for the webinar, some of the historical events that precedes today's event. For example, I was going through what happened back in 1988, which is commonly known as 4/8 or quadruple 8. On that day, 8th of August 1998, there was a mass uprising. So I was going through some of the newspaper clippings of that date, which captured the situation that unfolded in 1988 on ground. And as a result, Aung San Suu Kyi came out as the leader of that movement. And I was trying to juxtapose today's situation when military takeover took place on 1st of February. And I was trying to understand what is the difference. And the one difference that I see is Aung San Suu Kyi is not in the focus in today's mass uprising. Well, if I may say mass uprising is happening now is possibly debatable because within the past couple of days, we have seen the resistance is growing on the ground. Having said so, ladies and gentlemen and dear audience, let me also give you some update about the Rohingya crisis itself. As of now, we see 1.3 million Rohingyas are stranded in 34 camps in Bangladesh. And there were a number of bilateral and multilateral talks happened with regards to repatriation, but nothing could come to fruition. In the meantime, over 1 month, a number of Rohingya groups have been relocated to Bhasan Char Island. And also, due to the military takeover on 1st of February, we have seen a number of regional groupings and regional powers express their concerns. Amongst the ASEAN nations, only Singapore condemned the military takeover strongly. And from us, from Canada, we have seen a number of changes as well, because by next month, our federal government's commitment of financial aid is going to be over. And very recently, a press release from Honorable Senator Marilu McGovern came out where it titled as Urgent Action for Rohingyas. In that press release, it was explained why Canada needs to intervene more strongly and effectively for the Rohingyas itself. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let me introduce today's esteemed panelists. First, we have Professor John Packer, and he is an associate professor of law and director of Human Rights Research and Education Center based out of University of Ottawa. He was appointed as the inaugural Neuberger Jessin Professor of International Conflict Resolution in April 2018. Next, we are also very privileged to have Mr. Marvin Rotrand, who is a Canadian politician and a member of Montreal City Council, representing the district of Snowdown. Rotrand has served on Montreal City Council since 1982. And he's an avid supporter of Rohingya cause, and he's also deeply connected supporting Bangladesh communities in Montreal. Next, we have Mr. Anwar Arkani, and he's the founder and director of Rohingya Association of Canada. He has been campaigning for Rohingya issues in Canada and abroad for over 20 years. And our final speaker today is Samantha McGovern, and who is an co-executive director of InterPares based in Ottawa. She also co-manages InterPares' Burma program, which has been supporting civil society in Burma since 1992. Recognizing that systematic marginalization, discrimination, and persecution of ethnic and religious minorities has fueled armed conflict, InterPares Burma program aims to strengthen ethnic peoples' participation in peace building and governance, with a strong emphasis on women's leadership and structural reform. And we look forward from Samantha's speech the activities that InterPares has undertaken recently. So our plan today is to have the panelists and listen to their part on the first half of the session. And in the second half, we'll do a roundtable discussion facilitated by Dr. Hilal Mohiuddin, who is also the Director, Research and Communication with Conflict and Resilience Research Institute. And finally, the session is being live streamed, and we are expecting questions from the audience. And we'll be very happy to share the questions from you to the panelists, and we'll have answers from the panelists as they move forward. So without moving further, I open the floor for the panelists now, and we'll have 10 to 12 minutes time allotted for each panelist for their opening round of discussion. Thank you very much. Professor John, it's your floor, sir, now.
Yeah, there, sorry. Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmed, for the initiative to organize this and for the introduction. So obviously it's been very much in the news, and people have been watching, and so I'm not going to take much time to recount the facts. On the morning of 1st of February, the military leadership, the commander-in-chief, simply took control and arrested the sitting government and effectively dismissed them. Dismissal is not the correct term because there was no constitutional authority for this. Actually, there is a substantial constitutional provision for states of emergency in the 2008 Constitution, which was, of course, essentially written by the military regime. And that, according to that, Chapter 11, the president actually is the one who has the authority to declare a state of emergency. Obviously, that did not happen. It was the commander-in-chief, and chief simply did. And there are procedures and detailed. It's a lengthy chapter, actually, the Constitution, which was entirely ignored. I don't think it really matters because, to say that one's following the Constitution. If you look at this 2008 Constitution, it was always deeply flawed, would be an understatement. Not only was it not democratic in almost any way, I mean, it had some pretensions of democracy, but always there was the retained power and authority and the specific guiding power of the military, so-called safeguarding role, which is what I presume has been invoked. If there's any sense of legality on the part of the military, it's this kind of reserved right for the state, within the state. But then almost no other provisions have been followed, so we can't really refer to the Constitution. Actually, this is a straightforward coup d'état in a kind of classic sense. The now called state leader, so Commander-in-Chief has renamed himself state leader. That's not provided anywhere in the Constitution or any law to which I'm aware. And he has unilaterally appointed a government of, I think, 12 ministers. He's appointed a president who is a former acting president and a former lieutenant general responsible in Yangon, by the way, and having been involved in some repressive acts previously. And he's arrested not only the previous leadership. He's also they've been charged, particularly Aung San Suu Kyi and the former president, with criminal acts, and if they're convicted by these, even as minor as they may be, according to the existing law, however meaningful or unmeaningful it is, they would be precluded from holding public office. So that seems to be some little game going on to kind of settle that they should be removed entirely. Probably more importantly, virtually the whole leadership or the senior leadership of the National League for Democracy, a number of senior parliamentarians and others have been arrested. We really don't know the extent. Maybe some other colleagues here can fill us in on what's been happening in the different cities, but there have been definitely a lot of arrests, and unfortunately in the last day or two, there's also been violent incidents and a lot of course, protests we've been watching. Now, what precipitated this, I will just say, some people may find it a surprise, and in my experience, these kind of situations, while they're difficult to foresee the kind of specific moment or convergence of elements that lead to the eruption or the disruption, I would say this was long foreseeable. There were lots of problems in the country, lots of tensions, but the ostensible impetus was the outcome of the 8th November election, where the National League for Democracy, as foreseen and expected, won an overwhelming majority of the available elected seats. People remark 80, 83%. It depends on, there were two available houses to be elected, and the NLD won 83% in the lower house. But we should remember immediately that was a competition for only 75% of the seats. So they only won 83% of 75, actually. They did, however, outcompete the proxy party, the Union Solidarity and Development Party, which is the kind of military's proxy party, substantially. So they obtained far fewer votes and therefore seats than expected. But that's only a supplement to the 25% of reserve seats in the parliament for the military anyway, which protected the Constitution, but clearly showed a direction of popular support, a dwindling of military popular support. And this has important implications for control of certain civilian governmental authority, ministries that are not controlled by directly, immediately by the military. And this coincided with not just the increasing problems of the COVID pandemic, but a year-long or longer economic decline that's been biting. And there have been a lot of problems within the country. So I am simply now joining the dots in saying that there was clearly dissatisfaction on the part of the military leadership. And then there was this invocation of a pretension of fraud that was seemingly entirely fictitious. But I mean, in the era of fake news and so forth, it's very hard to know what they actually believed, whether they believed their own fiction. But this was invoked and was the basis for the removal. Okay, where are we? Let me just say a couple quick things on this, because we could talk a lot about the kind of deep causes and so forth. So the coup has occurred, and the state leader has said he's installed this new government for 1 year. I mean, God knows it'll be 1 year, 10 years, however long. We really don't know. Possibly surprised at the resistance that's come from the general population across the country, starting, I believe, initially from doctors in Mandalay, but it's now spread. I would just remark on a few things here. I agree with the earlier observation, Dr. Ahmed, that since 1988, 88 was an important year. You probably know in Chinese numerology, it was the most important year in the last millennia, I think, second most important year. 1888, 8th of August, 1888 would have been their happiest year. I was also married in 1988 on the 26th day of August, actually. So for me, it's hard not to remember I don't. Luckily, my wife isn't listening. I don't coincide my marriage date with the 88 movement. But what has changed is that the lady, her position and the hope and expectation around NLD on the part of the international community, I think, is badly diminished. Lots has changed. and not least, the lady is 75 years old. So if you're thinking kind of forward on this, and the generation that is now there that has had a taste of freedoms, in the space of that time, we went from a country that had literally in 1990 50 telephone lines connecting it with the rest of the world. Burma, as it was then called, before it was called the Union of Myanmar, was truly behind a bamboo curtain. It was cut off. And now a large part of the country has cellular connectivity. Even individual networks like Telenor have, I think, something like 18 million subscribers. So the country is connected. And what that means is that the young generation, people now are not only communicating, but they are seeing, they are observing the outside world. They are aware in terms of their aspirations and their expectations of what could be, what should be. And I think the ability to kind of turn that off and turn it back, I think, is almost beyond what the generals can do, though they're trying through their blackouts. And I think people have had rising expectations also in terms of some economic development. I don't want to take that away for those who have been advocates of the democratization of economic development. So just to conclude my remarks, it's entirely unforeseeable what will happen now in the next weeks or months. But I do think there is a problem of putting the genie back in the bottle in terms of popular appetite. There is an interesting coincidence of many of the ethnic groups and others. And I think the discussion that we really need to focus on now is not returning to a clearly flawed and, I would say, fictitious democratic transition or even peace process. But we have to, so it's not about going back or returning, but there is a possibility of going forward to set the stage for a genuine democratic process and a truly inclusive peace process. And now it's up to the international community whether that's going to happen. And I think there is a chance for that, not only obviously changes in places like Washington and elsewhere, but I think that there is an appetite, maybe not publicly expressed, by a number of powers in the region that really need to see some kind of stable process. The risk of this becoming a conflagration, it would be deeply disturbing for many in the region. So I think that's the little bit of hope I would attach. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Professor Packer, for, you would say, a very wholesome clarification of the situation and what might happen in the future. We greatly appreciate your insight, sir. Let me welcome now Marvin Rotrand. Sir, floor is yours now.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmed. I thank you and your colleagues for taking the time to organize an evening like this. It's particularly propitious at, a period when only 10 days has expired since the coup in Myanmar, and the world's attention has been focused on the region like it hasn't in a number of years. In fact, I know many of you personally, and many of you were involved in email strings with me over the New Year's holiday when we remarked collectively that, the Rohingya sort of faded from the Canadian consciousness. They weren't in the newspapers. People weren't talking about this ongoing refugee crisis. They had become invisible. And there was discussion on what needed to be done. Little did we know, in December, where we made certain decisions to write to Minister Mark Garneau, and I did send a letter in January on behalf of a restrained group, that two things would happen. That word would get out about that, and a mobilization would begin across Canada on behalf of the Rohingya. But second of all, that the coup would happen and the world's entire attention would suddenly be on the region, including the fate of the 1.3 million Rohingya in Bangladesh and the 600,000 who remain in Myanmar. I'm a municipal councillor in Montreal, as you pointed out. I actually am the dean of the council, and I have been there a long time. And during that time, I've seen the role of municipal councillors change. There was a time when our mandate was defined rather narrowly for taking away the garbage, filling the potholes, and not much more. But over the years, it's evolved as our citizens expect more from us. We've gotten into the field of public health, whether it's assuring, healthy lifestyles, the ability to access sports facilities, things like that locally. But more than that, our constituents ask us to act as a conduit for the affairs of the day. And I can tell you that issues of peace and justice and international solidarity have become part of the role of municipal councillors. We aren't the only ones who speak out on issues that affect our multicultural, multiracial Canadian population. The cities of Canada have gone under profound changes since the end of the 1960s. We are no longer a white country where everyone can trace their origin essentially to persons of British stock or French Canadians with some immigrants. We are now one of the most heterogeneous countries in the world, and our population wants us to be aware of what's going on elsewhere. And as such, we've grown beyond saying international friendship means simply to have sister city statements or expressions of friendship. We now actually have deals with other cities. In our own case, we have relationships with places like Shanghai and Hanoi where we're involved in providing expertise, and they in return provide expertise to us in certain areas. We leverage our ability to run a transit system to provide counsel to cities all over the world. So the relationships are much more complex than they were years ago. In Montreal, we make an annual statement to remember the victims of the Holocaust every year. International Holocaust Remembrance Day, January 27th, is important, so is Yom HaShoah. We make a statement every year about the Armenian genocide. And we make a statement every year about the Rwandan genocide as well. And as such, it's not unusual for our city council to become aware of what was going on in Burma, in Myanmar. And as such, many members of council began hearing from their constituents when suddenly we began to learn of what was happening to the Rohingya. We were among the first to say Aung San Suu Kyi's honorary Canadian citizenship should be stripped away. Her Nobel Prize should be taken back. And we asked for more. In April 2019, the City Council adopted my motion unanimously, urging the Government of Canada to provide long-term multilateral aid and to, as well, support the efforts to bring Myanmar in front of the International Court of Justice for the crime of genocide, invoking the Genocide Convention and using the statutes of the court to hold accountable the military in Myanmar. And we worked very hard with Senator Mary Lou McPhedran, who actually proposed a motion in the Senate that would have done exactly this. The motion unfortunately died during a filibuster on the budget. Unfortunately, it was the very next item to be heard, and it died. Over the last years, Canada has provided aid. Canada is providing $100 million a year, and Canadians support that aid, which provides the most basic services to the refugees in the camps, and as well has nudged our partners into providing more and has convinced the government of Bangladesh that there are needs for young people, the children, for education, that this may be a long-term problem, that there's no imminent political solution, and the Rohingya are not going home voluntarily in safety and dignity in the coming weeks or months, that this is a long-term problem. But then somehow, like often happens in many refugee cases, the Rohingya began to fade from the headlines. And from the headlines, they fade from public consciousness. So when we wrote to Minister Garneau in January on behalf of a smaller group on our email string, word got out there and people started saying, we must do more. This isn't enough. There's got to be a larger mobilization. And when the coup happened in the last number of days, we decided to do more. I want the audience to know that a letter was sent to Minister Marc Garneau with CC's copies to Minister Chrystia Freeland and Marco Mendocino as Minister of Immigration, with other ministers receiving unofficial copies as well, and a copy to Bob Ray, our ambassador at the United Nations. And we made 4 demands. Like in January when we wrote to Mr. Garneau, aid for the Rohingya was the number one demand. Our aid expires at the end of March, and we have asked the government of Canada to renew that aid and to make an immediate and rapid statement that it's committed to do that again. We also asked for additional funding. We want to assure the education of the Rohingya in the refugee camps and in Myanmar. And we want to make sure that trickles to everyone, including young women and girls, who are too often left out of the first priority. That is the first demand, but we also added 3 additional demands. The second, similar to 2019, we want more from Canada in terms of holding Myanmar accountable at the International Court of Justice. In response to our initial motion, in September of 2020, Canada and the Netherlands made a joint declaration that they support the Gambia's complaint against Myanmar at the International Court of Justice. But that isn't a formal form of participation. It's a statement of moral support. And while we appreciate it, we feel more needs to be done. And that more is to invoke Article 62 of the court statute for Canada to become active party of the case. The third demand was brand new. We want Canada to use the same types of programs that admitted 49,000 Syrian refugees to Canada in 2015, 2016. The Rohingya are not going home anytime soon. This is a long-term crisis. We believe Canada needs to open its doors, as it has on so many other humanitarian issues over the decades past. We want Rohingya refugees to be admitted here. And fourthly, we ask Canada to stand with our partners to condemn the coup, to invoke sanctions, and to work to restore the path to democracy in Myanmar as one of the ways to solve the crisis. The letter to Minister Garneau was signed by 9 senators. I thank Senator Mary Lou McGovern from Manitoba for being the point person in the Senate, but I want to say that it was also signed by Senator Jaffar, Senator Thomas Bernard, Senator Pate, Senator Hartling, Senator Ravadio, Senator Lofredo, and Senator Atullah Jan. As well, the audience should take note that several mayors from across Canada signed this letter, as did 16 city councillors representing Toronto, Montreal, Regina, Edmonton, and Ottawa. It was also signed by representatives of well over 30 groups and 10 academics. There were 78 signatures. The Quebec Liberal Party caucus signed the letter, and I received an email too late before the letter went in from Quebec Solidaire, wishing also to express its support. This was done quickly. I'm certain that the number of signatories can be expanded, and in fact, I would invite those who are watching who want to add their names to let me know. A second letter is planned because a number of individuals want to make sure that Canada invokes sanctions and Canada works very closely with our allies to restore democracy. President Biden is quoted in a number of media today indicating that the military must restore power, release the prisoners, and the road to democracy must be embarked upon immediately. I agree with Mr. Packer. The international community has far more to do than it did the last number of years. We all knew the 2008 Constitution was a poison pill, that it was likely to fail. It's time for us to say that we no longer accept that. There has to be genuine democracy, and that the world has to hold those who are involved in the genocide against the Rohingya accountable. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marvin Rotrand. It was very encouraging. I would say, dear audience, please take a note, Mr. Marvin Rotrand's invitations to join your hands and your willingness for petition for help of our Rohingya brothers and sisters. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome Anwar Arkani for his part of the speech today. And as you know, he's a Rohingya leader himself. He has spent countless hours organizing Rohingyas in Canada, and I met him in Winnipeg when he was speaking in Canadian Museum of Human Rights. So Anwar, floor is yours, sir, now.
Thank you, sir. First, I would like to thank you, Dr. Councillor Ahmad, for organizing this very timely event that is really needed to let the human rights activists as well as other people know around the globe what is going on in Burma and what is the prospect of surviving Rohingyas in the coming days and months and years. I would not go to the length that how it happened, why it happens. I will just jump directly to the points how it would impact Rohingyas' cause. Before that, I just would like to touch just one point that Professor John Packer touched about the law. So although there is law, there are many different types of very strong law, good laws written in a very nice book in Burma. They were never implemented properly. They were on the shelf somewhere in the closet or whatever other place that they keep. Really, the things are whatever is coming out of their mouth is the law of that particular time. That's how the country has been ruled since I was born, since, as long as I remember. So, to be honest, what is happening right now, I'm kind of happy. I know it sounds ridiculous to say it. I'm not shy about it. I'm happy. I'm happy. Before I continue, I also would like to let you know, in case there is a sound issue, please let me know. Sometimes this earphone set goes kind of messy. There are a couple of points that I jot down to say why I am happy. The West, mostly because of political interest, economical interest, geopolitical interest, so many other interests, they were just spinning the words, oh, gradual transition to democracy, this, that, so many buzzword using. They were somewhat very lenient or acceptance or very good to Aung San Suu Kyi's government. Say it was democratic. No, it was not democratic. Aung San Suu Kyi is out of the scene, and it is good, especially for Rohingya's cause. Whoever is deeply researching the Rohingya issue would get it. Do I support military? No, absolutely not. I never did. I do not, and I will not do. But compared to what Aung San Suu Kyi was able to complete towards the destruction of the entire race, which it was not possible in the almost 60 years reign of dictatorship, because the West and trusted her completely and let her do whatever she would like to do, and that's what she did. Then this coup put military in a very sort of a backward situation, and I don't think they will actually be able to do more harm to the Rohingya. So that is a positive in a way for me. And also, when Suu Kyi was in power, I was absolutely hopeless. Absolutely, there is, media was silent, and funding was not renewing by the donors, and the host country, Bangladesh, for one reason or another, the refugees were moving towards island, not inhabited prior to the refugees move, and God knows what other plans the government has. And also, what Wall mostly said was Aung San Suu Kyi's hands were tied. She was not able to do things although she wanted to do. And it was wrong. It was completely wrong. She let herself to be used. She let herself to be used by the military so that she can remain in power. Only thing she cared was the power. That's it. As long as she is seen as a queen or whatever other thing she going through her mind, the status, that's all that matters to her. She didn't care poor people. She didn't care. Even Burman, forget about Rohingya, Burman who lost their lives in Debaying massacre when the previous army government was trying to kill her. There are a lot of people amputated, got lost, lost their hands and legs and lives. Those survivors, they didn't get anything under Aung San Suu Kyi's government administration. She was given full administrative power for the last 5 years. She misused and abused all those years. So those are some really bonus point that if I go through all this nightmarish, horrific thing, because my entire family, nobody is back in Burma, either dead or surviving. I still have 3 sisters, and one of them would die in any minute. They're in the camps. I can't do anything. So I don't know what a proper word I can use actually to describe the horrible thing, but I felt relief. I was still, really feeling very good that she is not in power. So things could change drastically if I look at it in a positive way, because the army would be in a very critical stage and they could not do things they would like to do otherwise if Aung San Suu Kyi was in power. So we can also do better advocacy work around the globe, because she is not in power, and the Western government, powerful government, who could bring some changes, could not say, hey, there is a transitional democracy. You guys need to wait a little bit, give some time, and all these things, buzzword, cannot be there. But of course, what Rohingyas are going through right now is the biggest obstacle I see is the leadership crisis. We don't have a leader. We don't have a leader. We have like everyone pretend to be a leader and they don't really have a plan. We don't follow another leader. There are a lot of lacking or a lot of things that we're running short of. Also, people who are honest and are qualified, they're just struggling to survive in overseas or in diaspora, to feed their families, and they're busy working and they don't have money, and all sort of shortcomings that we're running into. That is a major thing that we cannot really do what we would like to do, when even if there is a better chance for us to carry forward. That is the backdraw that I see. I'm kind of now jumping to the second point that Professor Ahmad put here. So that is a crisis that I don't see a light in near future to solve and carry forward. So we don't have any uniformity in presenting our case and doing things. The other thing is, things could go actually very wrong as well. After the coup, very quickly, the most extremist Rakhine Party, ANP, signed some kind of understanding and agreement with the army. So that is the party actually initiated the massacre in 2012 and burned all the houses and drive out all the Rohingyas and kill all the Rohingyas, or a lot of the Rohingyas. So they could restart another one just to completely cleanse the remaining Rohingya in Arakan. That is really a chilling feeling that I have, and a lot of other people in my community. That is scary. I don't know how things would go. On the flip side, army could bring back refugees. Army already talked to Bangladeshi government, and maybe they would be a little more lenient because of the coup pressure. They could be a little bit lenient, and they could make some changes. They have power. They can do it. For example, Kukan. I'm not against any another clan. For the record, I need to say it. There is a clan called Kukan. They were not Burman, or Burmese. They were never listed anywhere. So they are now called Tayinda, which is like native. They got native status. They are all Chinese. They're in Shan State. They were given by the army. So what I'm trying to say is, I'm not saying that implying that we are foreigners and we should be given their status by the Burmese army. I'm not saying that. We are from there, but the army could bring us back because they have the power. They are the one running the country for generations. But we have a proverb in our language. If I roughly translate it, it says, if someone's father is eaten by a crocodile, he would fear a floating log. Since we have been through all this crisis under civilian government, military government, and regular Buddhists, based on so many kinds of excuses and discrimination, it's not easy to see things black and white or really accept it until it is in our hand and we're enjoying it. So the biggest fear for me now is maybe at some point West will again beat the drum and say, hey, Aung San Suu Kyi was the democratically elected leader. Let us, destroy the army, put back power to Aung San Suu Kyi. She will become a nice lady. We don't know. In the last term, her hands were tied. Maybe this time we should give a second chance. And that is the depth of the Rohingya case. Really, that is the biggest fear I have. That is the also end of my my talk, and I would like to thank you, Professor John, Honorable Marvin Rotrand. I think Samantha was there too. Samantha and Dr. Ahmed, everybody who were in the email chain that Honorable Marvin Rotrand started about the refugee resettlement. It will be a really wonderful idea, and it is very relieving for people who have been trying to see some improvement in Rohingya's life. I know it is not a solution, but we can save some lives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Anwar. It was a splendid experience listening to you and the way you connected the situation and the future. Thank you so much. And dear audience, we might try again to bring Mr. Anwar for more in-depth analysis of the situation in the future. So let's move on to our very important and our final panelist today. And she's Samantha McGovern from Interpress. And ma'am, floor is yours. And we would like to know a little bit about your organization and its works, because I think it's very important to understand the contribution of Interpress in Myanmar. Thank you. Floor is yours, ma'am.
Thank you. Well, given that introduction, I can start by saying that Interpares is a Canadian social justice organization, and we work not through setting up offices overseas, but work through relating to activists and social movements that are rooted in their own context and that are working for long-term change in their own environments by playing a role here in Canada to act in support and in solidarity of those movements through raising funds, raising political attention, engaging Canadians, and building relationships of mutual support with those working for change in Canada as well. And we have been working in solidarity with peoples from Burma since the early 1990s, and our focus from the beginning has been on those who have been the most heavily impacted by years of dictatorship and armed conflict, which have been Burma's ethnic people, including the Rohingya. And so our focus has always been to provide support to those popular organizations of movements so that they can both meet immediate community needs, but also contribute to building long-term sustainable peace in the country with a view towards addressing the structural roots of injustice and conflict in the country. In terms of our topic today, I just want to start by acknowledging that these are stressful times to have a coup d'etat on top of a pandemic and genocide and mass displacement. And for the Rohingya amongst us, especially those who have family inside camps in Bangladesh or inside Arakan State or even in Malaysia, where there's been a big wave of anti-Rohingya sentiment in recent months, I can only imagine stress and worry right now. So my heart is with you at this moment. Many of us have been glued to our news feeds, just watching each development as it unfolds, some of which were already referenced, such as the civil disobedience movement that mushroomed quickly within a week, growing from medical workers to teachers, youth, volunteers, students, professors, airline workers, telecoms workers, bank staff. It's been quite impressive. Multiple ministries have staff who have either suspended work or who are staging workplace protests during the day. And the images of street protests are also inspiring, despite the regime's move on February 8th to criminalize gatherings of more than 5 people. We're seeing tens and tens of thousands of people continuing to gather in major cities. The repression is now growing, more so outside of Yangon than inside, where since there are more international presence in media in Yangon, but the military's progressed from using water cannons to rubber bullets and live ammunition, now with at least one fatality at the moment. Reports suggest that perhaps 500 people have already been arrested. Some have been sentenced already to 2 or 3 years. I might point out that those are longer sentences than soldiers who have engaged in crimes against civilians. And others have been released once signing agreements that limit their actions moving forward. Many MPs were released after having been initially detained. If the military follows its playbook from earlier decades, then they're at home anxiously awaiting what might follow. Probably some late night house visits where they will be pushed on their loyalty to the military. In the past, people refused to express their loyalty, and thus were jailed and detained. And but who knows? This time going forward, perhaps there'll be agreements that they'll end up signing. Who knows? I've been myself watching the events unfold with a mixture of emotions. Of course, anger at the military in this latest demonstration of control, and anxiety, like many of you, for what it might bring, particularly for refugees, those living in conflict zones, and those who are already criticizing and resisting military control. But also, as well, the sense that the shoes finally dropped at last, and that the military's control of Burma is now nakedly on display for the world to see at last. Since there was this veneer of democracy that was provided by the UNLD government that enabled this situation where we had many countries whose government line was that they had to contribute to the democratic transition, but in the meanwhile, their companies were busy supplying the military and enriching its cronies. For millions of people who either live in or who have fled ethnic states, Burma has always been experienced as a country under military control. The waves of genocidal violence against the Rohingya over the decades that were not only not checked by the government, but were defended by its leaders and upheld in its laws, its discriminatory laws, those are ample proof, I think, of that control. The Tatmadaw offensives in ethnic states over the decades, where civilians were targeted, it's also proof of this control. Even now, the Tatmadaw has been engaging in offensives in Karen State, displacing more than 5,000 villagers since January, despite the fact that there's a nationwide ceasefire agreement that is meant to apply, which is being blithely ignored. To echo Professor Packer's point earlier, in the international community, we, the larger we, need to be cognizant of not building up narratives that will not contribute to sustainable peace, or that will contribute to a whitewashed understanding of what was happening there before. When you read statements that have been released by ethnic civil society organizations, they don't call for restoring the status quo and just rolling back time to just after the elections. They call for releasing all political prisoners, not just Aung San Suu Kyi and President Win Myint. They call for reforming the 2008 Constitution, which enshrines political military control. And they call for federal democracy, not just parliamentary democracy. There have been a lot of speculation about motives for the coup. You know, why would the military risk such as an advantageous situation when they held so much control while most of the world was content to look the other way? Theories focus on the ambition and personal enrichment of Senior General Min Aung Hlaing, who was set to retire in June and who was unsuccessful when he asked Aung San Suu Kyi to lengthen his term, reports say. The military may have also wanted to put the National League for Democracy in its place when its proxy party, the USDP, lost ground in November's elections, and also when Aung San Suu Kyi refused to hold elections in parts of Arakan State where she knew that her party would lose ground. And the military was in favor of holding elections there. There are also signs that the military wanted the NLD out of the way so that it could broker directly with EAOs in the peace process. And we're hearing early reports that there have already been talks where they have been told, don't worry, things will keep going on, and we're going to continue on with peace process. And so perhaps they felt that they could more readily control that process. Certainly the coup doesn't strike me as purely as a naked power grab. I think it's a very cunning move in their ongoing chess game. And I think the coming days and weeks will bring more clarity as the military moves beyond repressing protests in the civil disobedience movement, and they reveal more of their agenda. Already, the Tatmadaw has secured civilian members for the State Administrative Council that was previously mentioned to give it more of an inclusive and civilian veneer. There's an Arakanese, a Karenni, and a Karen politician who have been recruited, much to the dismay of many of their people and their parties. And the military also ended the government's nearly 2-year blackout of 4G internet in Arakan State and southern Chin State, perhaps to signal that their reign there will be a friendlier one, as perverse as that might seem. But we certainly need to be wary of all moves on the part of the regime to legitimize itself. On the other hand, the coup could eventually embolden the military to wrap up unfinished business against the Rohingya and the EAOs. There is a lot of uncertainty right now, and I certainly appreciate the fear that Mr. Arkani expressed on that issue. So I think the political movement, the moment presents both a challenge and an opportunity for Rohingya activists and those of us who are advocating on behalf of the Rohingya. There's renewed international attention on Burma, as mentioned, and there's outrage that is engendered in the West, and those create opportunities to keep diplomatic attention on Burma, to target the military and its cronies with targeted sanctions, and to press our governments to join accountability measures such as the International Court of Justice lawsuit. But there is the risk that Aung San Suu Kyi will be viewed domestically or otherwise as a beleaguered Democrat with complete obscurity of how her government engaged in genocide and how it imprisoned journalists and civil rights defenders using repressive laws that they never repealed despite having a supermajority in both houses, and how they prevented aid from reaching those displaced by war, and how they let over 100,000 Rohingya languish in concentration camps for nearly a decade. So my hope is that we can collectively seize these opportunities to press for accountability, to use the economic levers that we have to pressure the military, and that there will be finally some national movement building that joins people in central Burma with those in ethnic states and those who are living in exile abroad in favor of true structural reform. But I recognize that these are not struggles that will bring immediate fruit or prospects for sustainable repatriation in the short term, and that the situation for those living in camps remain dire. So as much as it is a Band-Aid solution in many ways, I think the short-term measures that appear viable are a renewed effort on the part of the international community to provide renewed and increased humanitarian aid, as well as resettlement with all of the challenges of dispersal that this brings, in tandem with legal pressure through the ICJ case and political pressure for change. So, and towards that end, I was honored to co-sign Councillor Rotrand's letter that he referenced, that was signed by many parliamentarians, civil city councillors, and human rights leaders. And I'm happy to hear of plans to issue another letter, as I think actions need to go beyond that in terms of what roles we can play in Canada. Certainly deepened sanctions will be very important, and political pressure, which I would argue that that message needs to have holistic messaging about the nature of change that is required, and not just make very short-term limited demands about the restoration of the elected parliament government. Now more than ever, justice and sustainable futures for the Rohingya are bound up in sustainable peace for all of Burma's people who have suffered under military rule. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samantha, for your well-rounded, I would say, view of the whole situation on ground and Canada's role. So, ladies and gentlemen, the audience, we are in the second stage of our session today, and at this point in time, I would invite Dr. Hilal Mohiuddin to kindly facilitate the Q&A session. And I will be also having some questions to the panelists. So Dr. Helal Muhyiddin, please take over the floor now, sir.
Thank you very much, dear esteemed panelists. Do you hear me properly? You hear me properly? Okay, that's a good.
Yeah, perfect.
Perfect. Okay. So the things are evolving very, very fast in Myanmar. It is very difficult for anyone to predict anything or forecast anything. But it's a 60 years that the Myanmar people are under military rule, in a kind of military rule. The developments that we have seen over the last couple of days are really different than any other movements before. Even it is significantly different from the 88881 because of civil disobedience. The government apparatus, especially the bureaucracy, the people in bureaucracies are also coming out in protest and in solidarity with the people. This is something very interesting turn to me, because we have an experience of having a mass upsurge in Bangladesh in 1990 that ousted a military ruler and 10 years of tyranny from Bangladesh. Out of that, just we need to know from, my question is specifically to Mr. Arakani, do you see any prospect? Because I see that you have two ideas. Number one, that the West should not focus more on having Suki back, that she is the elected person, because she would not be really helpful for Rohingyas or others or for democracies, because she was more inclined to retaining her power. She did not have any other big commitment to people, and it is proven reality. So do you think that now that the situation is a little bit different than any other time, even different from 1998, do you see any prospect that at some point military will bow down to people's demand to go back to the barrack and change the constitution or help gain democracy in this country, even better than the time that we had, just a kind of makeshift sort of democracy that we had over the last 4 or 5 years from 2015 to 2020?
No, sir. Unfortunately, no experience. If we look back, what happened in 1988 and 2007, Saffron Revolution. The day Saffron Revolution started, I flew from Thailand to Canada. I was doing some volunteer refugee work there with Boot people. First time exposed Boot people. Prior to that, there were no Boot people known on the in the public media or newspaper or anything like that. I was there for 18 months at the Burmese border. So that is not the point. My point is in 88, it was something like this: naval force, infantry, air force, police, immigration, teachers, all these civil servants were, lining up with children and wife and husband, all this, days and days, hundreds of thousands of people on the street of Rangoon for a very long time. And all of a sudden, they started killing people like chicken, really. Back and forth on the side. They didn't care who is dying, how they are dying. So this is a very unpredictable regime, a very unpredictable race, I would say. And similarly, they kill thousands. Nobody knows actually how many. Even the government did not know, because they bulldoze, put them in the mass grave, and some of them in the ocean or in the water bank of the river. And in people lost hope. I saw thousands of students fled to Thailand in 88, later part of 88, in 89, up to 1998. I was in Thailand for 10 years. I have met hundreds of Burmese students, and a lot of people died out of stress and became alcoholic, all those things. And in 2007, when Saffron Revolution started, people thought, well, this is the only chance for us to get out of this dictatorship, because mostly the Buddhist people are very respectful towards monks, and they will not kill the way they kill the demonstrators in protesters in 1988. But it was not the case. They kill a lot of monks, and monk disappeared, and they crash. So this time I have a really chilling feeling. If I think about those days, I don't think army will listen to anybody. They will crash. We're not sleeping right now, really, day and night, watching, receiving a lot of information, and every night the government is arresting hundreds of civil servants who participate in the day demonstration. They have people spying with cameras and all this. At night they go and arrest them. That's what happening. God knows when the big crash would come, and it is really a biggest fear I have.
Can I, Hilal, with your question was very interesting, and so was the answer from Mr. Arkani. There seem to me to be two different aspects. And it's the second one that's more interesting to me, is what is the road to democracy? In answer to Mr. Arkani, 1988, 1989, 1990, very different than now, partially because there's more visibility. The country is not as invisible as it was. Impunity breeds when no one can see what is going on. In the age of, the cellular telephone and the global worldwide net, and you can cut off electricity, you can cut this off, cut that out, but the cell phone images get out eventually. It means that the military knows there's far more scrutiny. I'm not discounting their ability to be irrational and violent. But however, there is less ability to do this completely in silence with the relative assurance of impunity. And I think that acts as a brake. And I believe the international community is far more aware of the possibilities now. But let me get to the second part of Hilal's question, which really dealt with this road to democracy. What is the future of Aung San Suu Kyi? Because the one thing we don't want is for her to go as she is now a pariah in the international community to one who's suddenly the hero, the rallying point for democracy, for those who want to see it. And already we're beginning to see some movement in that direction. Dr. Packer got the numbers absolutely correct. She's immensely popular within Burma among the Burmese. 83% of the vote, and international organizations say more or less a free and fair vote. That, for me, my reaction was allegations of fraud by the military. Well, I could believe that on their side because I can't see any way they elected 33 seats. It seemed to me to be too high of a number. Having said that, the election was an expression of popular support. And right now for the Burmese people, those people who are going out in the street, they're going there with the demand to restore the NLD, but also to restore Aung San Suu Kyi to, her former position. So it's going to be difficult to move her out of the picture. Yet she should be, because I see her as largely responsible for the ongoing genocide against the Rohingya and her refusal to do what a democratically elected government should have done. And in fact, some of the worst verbal attacks against the Rohingya come from her. And as such, I consider her to be an enabler of what happened. So thus, the international community must tread with some caution, realizing that can't you toss her aside in the sense that the Burmese people will find that a very difficult position to understand. But on the other hand, we cannot go back to a situation where the NLD is restored to power with the same leadership and the same positions that they had before.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Most points are made. I will go to John Packer. John, I think many of the confusions and questions are already answered by Marvin by this time. But I still have something to know. It's about the theory that is, very popular theory that the military was looking for a safe passage because Mr. Lang's term is going to be probably over by July this year, and he wanted an extension, but there was no guarantee that it would be extended, and there is no provision at all to get it extended. So since he is already under the trial of ICC and ICJ, he wanted a safe space, safe passage, safe exit, and this is why he did it. And for within this 1 year, probably he would be doing something to get. But we know that China is not a country that would give him shelter, because Chinese policy is not to allow anyone as political dissident or something, and there is less prospect and possibility. So what would be the future in this context? This is one to you, and the another one is about globalization. Now we are living in globalized world, and Myanmar is not an exception either. It also has, as Marvin mentioned, you also mentioned, and everyone mentioned, that social media and internet connectivity is there. The military can't really block it using force. So there would be some sort of access of people. Last time they perpetrated genocide against the Rohingya Muslim using social media. Facebook was an important factor there. So this time, for the opposite reason, whether social media can play a good role. And the third one, to John Packer once again, it's about anyway, I just lost the context of that one. That's another important question. When it comes to my mind, I will ask you once again, but probably it will be connected with Mr. Arkani as well. You both need to answer that question for greater understanding of the realities around there. Okay, please, John.
So I'll respond to two things. And maybe I'll leave a little bit about the kind of effects of globalization. There were already references to the connectivity and the kind of change of generations and so forth that is a very different situation than even 10 or 15 years ago, but certainly than 25 or 35 years ago. In fact, a large number of the people on the street today were not born in 1988 or 1990. So there's a really big change going on. Let me raise two things. One is there has emerged over many decades, not just the kind of cult of personality around the lady, around Aung San Suu Kyi, but also very, very unfortunately, what I would call extreme Buddhist or Bamar nationalism. Not just a kind of some political scientists sometimes speak about benign nationalism and even positive nationalism. The movements of, for example, Catalan nationalism right now as a kind of resistance to repression from the Spanish state that's impeding them as a ethno-national group from pursuing and fulfilling their aspirations for the use of their language, for autonomous control over their own environment and so forth. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a nationalism that is generated with an animus towards others and with a chauvinism. I mean, really the kind of, if I may say, the evil kind of nationalism. And it has been more than alive and well. It has been propelled. And Aung San Suu Kyi is linked to that, and has weirdly, of course, connected this with the Tatmadaw as the defender of the nation and so forth. So I just want to underline here that we those who are not watching closely and might think, oh, there's a popular, grassroots demand for democratic. No, be very careful what this is also reflecting. This is also reflecting a Bamar nationalism. So it's not, if one talks about restoring the status quo ante and putting her back, they're also talking about restoring, in my view, what was clearly a conflict-generating political paradigm. And that's why we also have to pay attention to the Constitution. It's not just the status of the army. The Constitution is explicitly racist. It literally composes the constituent elements of the state on the basis of what are explicitly races, and which is hugely problematical from a human rights perspective and from an ethno-cultural perspective, never mind a federal arrangement. I mean, we know where these go. I mean, for example, Nepal tried to devise federalism on the basis of ethnic or racial belonging. That's a disaster. It doesn't work, and it's anti-human rights. So there's a lot wrong in that. So that's one of the elements. The second thing I wanted to draw attention to is the character of the military. This is not a little group. This is a huge, well-established. We're talking about 4 generations. I mean, since the birth of the state, the army, the armed forces, is huge in number. It is a highly developed, super well-resourced institution. And it is largely insular. Don't forget that. We're not talking about worldly people who have spent time, a lot of them studying in Columbia University and so forth. And they're not much concerned, by the way, about some of, I attended, I won't say which, but a well-known human rights organization just the other day, had a kind of webinar and was talking about the necessity of travel visa bans on the generals as a kind of penalty. I honestly don't think the generals care about whether they're going to get a flight to Montreal ever, and or even frankly much beyond Southeast Asia. And by the way, there won't be a travel ban in Southeast Asia. They'll happily go to Singapore or to the horse races in Hong Kong and or to the beaches in Vietnam. That will continue. So we have to be very kind of sober about this. And I think Marvin also made the point that the risk here is of a very, or I forget who made the point, but I'll make the point again. There is a risk here of very bad, awful repression that may have already started. I mean, the people who've been arrested may, I'm sorry to say, already be either dead or disappeared. That is the nature of this regime and has been. So we're facing a conundrum. But in the face of this conundrum, this is not a moment for equivocation or for soft pedaling or for uncertainty about our position. And in that regard, I want to be very clear. I am deeply disappointed as a Canadian in our government over now 5 or 6 years, because this predates the 2017 situation and this kind of hesitancy constantly and the uncertainty about what really we should be doing. And we're definitely not leading. Let's get that off the table right now. Canada has not been leading on this. So I just think from all perspectives here, we need to grasp this very dangerous situation. We need to be clear what we're being asked for, and we should be mobilizing on a broad basis. Sorry, I think I spoke too long. I would like to hear from colleagues about the globalization. Maybe Samantha, you've got something to say about that.
Can I, Dr. Hilal, with your permission, can I just add
sure.
one point? So Professor Packer actually nailed it, the point that we are talking about establishment which is well grounded since 1962. Explicitly, the psyche of Myanmar is equal to military psyche of Tatmadaw. And Professor Packer is absolutely right in pointing out that we are talking about such a well-rounded, firmly grounded organization, which also has that nationalistic flavor. Ask any Bamar, and I'll go here with Dr. Mr. Anwar, because he lived in that area for so many years. Ask a regular Bamar person in Myanmar, he or she will equally like Tatmadaw and NLD side by side, if you say so. And also, I'd like to add, substantiate Professor Packer's comment that in 1988, through the mass uprising, what you call 8888, Ne Win was displaced. But look, who came again? There is no Suki. Suki was house arrested in 1993 onward. Again, the military came in different forms and fashion. And it continued, as Mr. Arkani rightly said, 2007 Saffron Revolution. Again, what we see, again, military came in different forms and fashion. In 2010, they just changed the constitution at their own will so that they retain the control of 25%, as you all know. So this is really, I would say, dear audience, it's tough to reflect upon what military or Tatmadaw will eventually do. As Anwar said rightly, it's highly fluid, and it's difficult to perceive their eventual goal. But on a lighter note, I just wanted to ask the panelists, do you think from the West, the broader international community, as Samantha was saying, the we. So shall we be appreciating if General Min Aung Hlaing shed his uniform and puts on tuxedo like Hosni Mubarak of Egypt or Muammar Gaddafi in Libya? Shall we be appreciating soon? Thank you.
Can I just jump in one quick thing I forgot to say? 2 seconds. The other thing about the Tatmadaw is they are also a business. We should all not forget that they are actually the largest business in Myanmar. I mean, literally from a procurement purchasing perspective, the military business, but they are also a massive conglomerate in commercial terms. And so the idea that, Min Aung Hlaing will go somewhere, he's not going to go anywhere. It's his business. It's his empire. So I just think we need to be cognizant of that. And there are big implications of understanding that.
No, thank you very much. It's a very vibrant and very stimulating discussion. And we actually wanted all these information to come out of our panelists, and it's nicely coming out. My last question to all of you, actually, anyone can jump into this discussion. This time, we have seen that people are not talking too much about Suki, the free Suki, but they are talking about something different, that are free all the people that are jailed, that are being arrested, and that are being abducted, or those people. So they are talking about all. So this is a qualitative change to my understanding than before. And how do you just see it and sense this change, whether people are? But one important thing that you mentioned before, I think John Packard rightly mentioned, that it's a chauvinist nationalism on the one side, and the military as an institution is so powerful there in the whole region. Probably in the whole region, this is the most powerful military regime, and they tried to make some kind of problems with Bangladesh. If maybe last year, 2019 and 2018, they were trying to instigate some kind of conflict, military conflict. We don't know why military resorted to that. But the thing is that they have business, they are strong business, and so they are not going to leave it. They're not going to, go back to Barak any soon, and they're not going to give the Myanmar people a democracy. There is no easy solution to that. So what would happen eventually? What would happen to the Rohingya people? How the Rohingya people are really seeing their future and their prospect? How because we are getting very conflicting information from the Rohingya camps, that some Rohingyas are happy that Suki is jailed and others are not happy. We are hearing that, but it is still very unclear and very confusing to most of us to understand their real opinion. And this is one important thing that we need to know: what would be the prospect for the Rohingya people to go back to Myanmar, because some people are saying that the military might be softened to them. And this is another important thing, is that recently the military told that the foreign policy will remain the same. They are not going to make any change there. The foreign policy will remain the same. By the meantime, in 2015, Suki went to China, and all the deals that are made with China, the business deals, especially deep sea port and the special economic zone, Belt and Road Initiative, everything was done by Suki, not by the military people. And the things will be remaining the same. So this is a very confusing situation. We really don't have a way to make a conclusion out of that, that okay, the foreign relationship, because Jinhua told that this is not a takeover. This is not a takeover. They just told that it's a kind of cabinet reshuffle. Xinhua, it was the report from Xinhua, and people are getting some sense out of it that okay, this is the opinion of the Chinese government. So what would be the future of the Rohingya people actually?
So I just would like to also bring Samantha here in a discussion. And while the question of Dr. Hilal remains on the floor, I would like to request Samantha to comment on the civil society actors in this situation, because you said that your organization do support movements and peace building activities on ground. What do you see changes with regards to some of the major actors on ground? Are they still siding with military's takeover, or oh no, they're thinking something else in support of the real democracy, whatever it is meant or perceived?
Well, I would say that the military takeover, I mean, it hasn't even been in some ways experienced as a military takeover, because it was so deeply intertwined, the nature of the military control and the government control. I mean, just thinking of your comment earlier, Dr. Halal, about all the government deals that were made. Those deals were all either directly enriching the military or their cronies, and were also leading to militarization, of these infrastructure projects under the One Belt One Road initiative from China. That concessions would be granted, and then the military would come and displace people. Very little. Any sort of perhaps veneer of local consultation, no local benefits, and it just brings human rights violations as well as corporate enrichment for the military. And so the degree to which the government and the military were working hand in hand, that is just been completely obscured over the years through the last several years of quote unquote quasi civilian rule, and the way in which there were oppressive laws that were on the books that were brought in under military dictatorship, that were used even more amply by this democratic regime in terms of arresting people, or limiting freedom of speech on behalf of independent media and so forth. And so I think that there have been signals to say that it will be business as usual, and that is very much what has to be disrupted. We cannot have business as usual. We cannot have the blithe ignorance of the degree of this complicity with corporate enrichment of the military by foreign governments who just wanted to have stable diplomatic relationships while their companies were going in and were profiting immensely through economic development of the country. And so I think through looking at targeted sanctions, through increased political pressure, this absolutely has to be disrupted, because they're very much wanting to continue on the path that they were already on before.
Dr. Ahmed, I have to go in a few minutes.
Yes, I totally acknowledge. So with your permission, Dr. Halal, what I would like to do now is to wrap up this session and what we say last words from the panelists. So if I may request all the panelists to just, if you can reflect Dr. Halal's question and your concluding remarks now, that will be absolutely our last part of our session today. So let's start with Marvin first, because he has an appointment. So Marvin, your last words, and if you can.
I'd like to say two things. All right. First of all, a resolution in Myanmar and aiming at that should not take our eye off the ball, that we must do something for the Rohingya refugees outside the country immediately. So look, while we were speaking, someone from the audience sent a message about the fact that much of the industry in Myanmar is owned by the military. It's almost more like a mob than a conglomerate, the word you used. And I'm going to suggest that needs sanctions, and the entire Western alliance has to work together to target that. But at the same time, one of our demands in a letter to Minister Garneau dealt with something we have never asked for before, and that's the admission of Rohingya refugees to Canada. And that's new, because among the groups working several years ago on getting something in front of the International Court of Justice, there was a feeling that we were aiming towards a just political settlement that would allow the Rohingya to go home. I think the realization there is there's nothing imminent at all, and that Canada should be opening its doors, and so should others. The Rohingya should not languish for decades to come in refugee camps. I thank you again, Dr. Ahmed. You'll have to excuse me another call.
Sure, by all means. Marvin, thank you so much for being with us.
You're welcome.
We appreciate your efforts.
Good evening, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marvin. Thank you very much.
So, Samantha, your last words, please.
I want to just return to this question of globalization and reflect on the differences between now and the 1980s or in 90s. You know, where the ethnic civil society, you know, that they've been documenting, you know, how the military has been hunting them like animals and has been waging war on them for decades, and those were happening not under the spotlight of the international community. You know, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have social media where we could have immediate reports, you know, and many years later, under the 2017 wave, you know, there were these immediate reports, and the world was able to pay attention. But the question for me is that, you know, who is listening? You know, now we have access to this vibrant network of civil society organizations who continue to document human rights violations and who have so many proposals for how a federal democracy could look, you know, one in which Indigenous people's aspirations for self-determination can be honored, and one in which long-term peace can take place. But who is listening? You know, that there hasn't been a true democracy to be listening to them, in which, even though they have been doing their best to engage, the international community has not been engaging effectively. And so I think that now more than ever, if the world is listening, then there are so many proposals that have been put forward by people's movements. And hello, here's my young addition to the panel, that we need to listen to these experiences for people who have seen the years of dictatorship and who have spent so many years working at the grassroots level to develop these long-term visions for how a true federal democracy could be installed. And so now is a time more than ever to be able to amplify those efforts and to be able to bring the levers of pressure that we can offer in the community, in the international community, for change, as well as our financial support to immediate relief efforts. Thank you.
Professor Packer, your words, and we'll finish with Anwar's reflection finally. Professor Packer, please.
Well, I'll just quickly say that it's good we're having this chat and this exchange, and the viewers who are watching, and thank you again to the organization for initiating this, the CRRIC. I agree with everything that's just been said by the previous two speakers, so I won't recount those. I'll say a couple things, one referring partly to a question or comment in the chat. From my experience in many such situations, I think what we're seeing from the people on the street is not so much what they're demanding for in precise terms. They're clearly expressing their rejection of kind of business as usual, that the military can just get away with this. And so this is, you know, classic popular resistance. And then it's mixed in with those people who have posters of pictures of Aung San Suu Kyi and so forth. They don't forget, they have never experienced, not a person in Burma, Myanmar has experienced an actual democracy. So they don't actually know what they're talking about in terms of, you know, what does genuine democracy, federalism, a real rule of law, like Mr. Arkani said, never in his life did anyone believe those law books actually meant anything. So, you know, there's a whole, if we really talk about a genuine transition, there's a long-term engagement we have to embark upon, which is a broad educational program, working with the people, the different ethnic groups and others. But what we do know is what the kind of pretense that occurred heretofore cannot be repeated. That was a charade. It has only led us to where we are. And in this regard, I just do want to underline one small thing, because if we ask ourselves, what can we do in Canada? You know, there's not much we can do. We can write some checks, help the refugees. You know, we can bring a few refugees here. We're not going to bring them all here. One of the things we can do, which we've pretended to say something about, is this case at the International Court of Justice. And the reason I mention it is because it's not just about winning a case. It's about the process of actually exposing the actual regime, because they're going to have to explain their conduct publicly and before a judicial body, applying for the first time ever to them a rule of law, an international law. And we should be robustly involved in that and absolutely a full party to it. And why we're not, I do not understand. But that's something that as Canadians we could say, we could do that. It's not costly. It can hold them to account. and it can have an impact. Thank you again for organizing this.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much. Mr. Anwar, your last words, please.
Yeah, unfortunately, I might have a very different last words. Respect, dignity, humanity, all these things exist in this country, because in this country I have spent more of my life than in any other country. I was born and raised and educated in Burma as well, but they don't know. It works only for people who have sense of dignity, respect, humanity. They don't care. In Burma, honestly, I can bluntly tell you, they don't care. They don't care respect, they don't care dignity, they don't care humanity. Doesn't matter who says what. So that is from experience, that's what I can say. Yes, it is a digital era, digital time. We cannot think that thing could go the way it did into 1988 and 2007, but still the military is unpredictable. They don't care. That's the bottom line. They don't care. If they do, then things would change for better. The other bad point, I would say, or negative point, is Aung San Suu Kyi has alienated her neighbors and the international community. Big supporters, really, she alienated in many ways. That is another really negative point. So situation is very critical and very unpredictable. God knows what would happen. So Rohingya's future is getting dimmer and dimmer. One thing would positive I would see is maybe there would be an international blank sanction of kind of something, regardless of there is any impact on the military or not. That's what we have been demanding that for the last many years. That could happen. So thank you again for organizing this. These are my last words. Thank you also to the audience.
Thank you so much for dear audience for being with us actually this evening. I'll just sum up very quickly and let you enjoy the rest of the evening by saying that we have heard all the panelists touching upon some core issues, core points with regards to the evolving crisis in Myanmar. We spoke about Rohingya and Rohingya future, the dynamics of Tatmadaw, how might they react in the future with regards to democracy. And time and again, we have heard from the panelists, dear audience, that we don't want to revert back to the status quo situation that NLD and its leader Aung San Suu Kyi actually offered in the past, because it never solved any resolution of the ethnic minorities, and with particular focus on Rohingyas. We also talk about the current constitution that Myanmar has. It is absolutely based on race, and it is actually racist, as Professor John Packer rightly put it. So I think unless something changes in the constitution, there would be any feasible change in the with regards to the fates of many ethnic minority groups, including Rohingyas. And I would like to also mention that within this whole mix, dear audience, do not forget about host countries, including Bangladesh, because Rohingyas are living in Bangladesh in bulk and 7 other countries. Host countries do play an important role, I would say very important role, not only for the current situation, but also in the future repatriation. For example, Bangladesh started to mobilize its diplomatic efforts through China, and there were bilateral talks. Well, we have not seen any proper result so far, and the last one actually was supposed to be held on 4th of February, ironically, but it didn't happen. But importantly, dear audience, host countries' contributions and their problems and issues must not also be forgotten from the international community side, because this is where Rohingyas are going to live for foreseeable future. And I would like to end today by thanking the panelists once again for their deep discussions and their insights for a larger audience. And we'd like to also share that, dear audience, Mr. Anwar Arkani leads Rohingya Association of Canada, and he's raising fund to support some of the Rohingya families who lost their livelihoods and their houses in the camps. These were burnt in the past couple of weeks. Please support Anwar Arkani's organization, Rohingya Association of Canada. And last but not the least, Conflict and Resilience Research Institute, currently working on 2 education projects for female adolescent Rohingyas in the camps. We are very fortunate to have been supported by Rotary International through their global grant programs. Please join in if you care for the education. We'll be more than happy to collaborate. And we look forward working with you again. And do not forget, on 16th February, 7:30 a.m. CST, 8:30 a.m. Sorry, 7:30 a.m. and 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We are going to have another webinar with Honorable High Commissioner for Bangladesh in Canada, and also a member of parliament from UK. So please tune in, have a close watch in the website. You will have all the details. So till the next time we meet again, have a nice and safe stay, and good night, all of you. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you.
And everyone, have a good day. Bye.